Thank you very much for being here, and thank you for the organization of these 2 days. A little switch of language. I do understand French, so if you want to pose your question in French, just speak slowly so I can grasp everything, but don't worry. So this work that I've done for my PhD thesis concentrate on 4 contemporary cases of debtors movement, and in particular the explanatory framework I will use is how they can allow us to interpret one of the crucial targets of the neoliberal restructuring of the economy, which is and lies in the norms and institutions that govern credit market in the household debt. The cases I'm presenting you relies on households that experience a great distress when they are under insolvency related to the collateral nature. So the goods and the social bonds that are threatened when the insolvency hits. They are excluded basically from the possibility of living a decent life, materially and socially. Episodes of such debt revolt are recurring in human history. They are constituted by people that refuse to accept the debt obligation they have or they contracted that they are supposed to fulfill in terms of repayment. It is the case for consumer debt, but also mortgages and the small business agricultural loans and microcredit loans. As already pointed out by many critical scholars, debt pervasivity is a form of control and reorganization of the reproductive labor in neoliberal capitalism. The reason for resorting to debt and the needs that answer through debt are evidently linked with the sphere of reproduction as broadly intended. What I want to concentrate on this work is how debtors movement can help us understand the mechanism that withstand this restructuring of economy by focusing on how movement emerge and how collaterals revealed themselves to be crucial for the movement to rise in the policy of debt. I'm presenting you turned off. Oops. It's not.
C'est mis en veille. Je l'ai remis en fait.
No,
C'est mis en veille, je crois. Et c'est mis en veille. Ouais.
Maybe. Okay. Cool. So I'm presenting you an overview of the 4 cases, and I will go for a comparative framework to present you the cases. So they are in chronological order. The first one is from Mexico from the mid-90s, where a huge monetary crisis hit, leading the peso to lose value against the dollar. Therefore leading inflation that pushed up interest rates for loans. 30% of Mexican people went into default, and the movement that arises from this situation is called el barzón, which in Spanish means the jogue, the heavy tool that is used to link cows and oxes to the carry. So introducing a sort of burden, a sort of heavy burden on the peasants. The Bolivian case is a case of microcredit revolt, which is not a unique case, but is unique in the sense of being nationwide revolt. As many of you know, Bolivia was target of structural adjustment for decades before the early 2000s. And this led to a growth of the informal sector, which we will see is crucial for the microcredit sector to grow. The next 2 cases are contemporary. One is from United States, in which an offspring of the Occupy Wall Street movement directly target, which is called strike debt, directly target the problem of debtor society inside the United States economy. The case of Spain is, on the other hand, completely targeting on mortgages. The particular mortgage law that holds inside Spain is curious because when you are in distress for your mortgage debt and you cannot pay back, giving up the ownership of the house is not enough to cancel out the debt. Therefore, you can find yourself without a house and having a debt for life, which transformed this condition of being in default into a big stress for families. I will now analyze the 4 cases in a comparative way to underline similarities and the structural elements that underline debt policy in general. I will present the loan type firstly, then the normative aspects, including the legal consequences of insolvency, and then we will look carefully at the cruciality of the collateral nature. Then I will describe the movements and their practices and their goals. In the case of Mexico, a little bit of history. In the early 90s in Mexico, there was a lack of support for the agricultural sector due to many political reasons, but one of those is the structural adjustment policy that was implemented before the NAFTA free trade agreement. The NAFTA agreement implied for the Mexican economy a push towards the manufacturing sector and lack of attention towards agricultural sector. This led Mexican peasant in a condition to have no option but to borrow money for buying seeds in hard financial conditions. The case of microcredit is well known for people who deal with these kind of financial tools all over the world, which is nowadays known to be a massive exploitation tool with dramatic consequences on the communities that fall in the mechanism of microcredit. This is well known and well studied, for example, in the case of Bangladesh, which is the first country where microcredit was implemented. The functioning of microcredit lies inside the existence of an informal sector in the economy, so small retailing, commercial activities that are community-based, and also on the exploitation of the social bonds, where they are actually the collateral of the debt. So if you go into default, what you lose is the connection you have with your community and your family. In the Bolivian case, the microcredit sector was believed to be mature in an economical sense when the institution, the NGOs that were implementing these financial tools were transforming themselves into financial institutions for profit. So here emerged the idea of being a powerful tool for the neoliberal restructuring, for extracting value. For the Spanish case, the history goes from the early 80s, where real estate speculation was accompanied by a public policy of housing that didn't support rent or social housing, but instead support access to loans. So the property of a house was the policy of the government of Spain in that years. For the US case, you can imagine the pervasivity of the debt resort for the American economy, which pervades many aspects of life, from education to consume and to welfare in general, also dealing with healthcare. And this debt economy didn't stop with the subprime crisis. In fact, even if mortgages did decrease after the crisis, many other part of the debt composition increased, especially student loans, which are nowadays in a big bubble crisis. And we can see from bankruptcy files in the US that the main reason why people go into bankruptcy is because of medical bills. So we can see that the debt is still a way to access basic need for American economy. for the disciplinary aspects, the normative aspects of legal environment of these cases, we can see that both eviction and intimidation, stalking are practices that are implemented in any case, but the peculiarity of some of those is particularly interesting, especially in the case of microcredit, where the violence of the microfinance is fully expressed. So the perverse mechanism of community extortion from shame and mutual disciplination is accompanied by a spiral of ever-growing debt. So families that go into the microcredit system continuously go and resort to microcredit to pay one debt after the other. So if in the American case there is people saying, I'm using my Visa to pay my MasterCard, the same applies for microcredit. In the case of the US, there is a peculiarity of personal bankruptcy, which is a legal specialty for America, which is a sort of relief from debt. So after you go to bankruptcy, you are forced to sell everything, but then you are free from your debt obligation. That can represent some sort of relief. But on the other hand, there is a variety of financial instruments that are particularly harsh for American consumer, such as, for example, credit score, which is a grade evaluation of your credit history that is posed on you and can affect many aspects of your life, like employment. Many employers ask for a credit score to before offering a job, and also housing. So having a rent contract can be undermined by your credit score. On the other hand, there also exist collection agencies, which are financial institutions that buy debt on the secondary market, debt that is possibly in the situation of not being paid. They pay it a little money in respect to the amount of debt which is owed, then they ask to the original debtor for the money back with hard and harsh conditions. These tools are more than heavy counterbalance from the relief of bankruptcy. Regarding the movements, which is to me the most important and interesting part of this, some basic practices are common, which concentrate on the protection and stop of the eviction for the members of the movement. I would concentrate on two of the most peculiar ones. One is from the Spanish case and the other one is from the American case. The Spanish case have many practices, but one of those, which is called obra social, involves the occupation of houses for families that have been evicted. And this occupation is spread through many movements inside Europe, but the peculiarity of the Spanish case is that they target specifically financial institutions because they choose banks' real estate. And then they self-establish a fair rent for their occupation that they pay to the bank. The other practice that I want to present you is the one of the rolling jubilee from the strike debt movement. The rolling jubilee is an initiative that, through a crowdsourcing moment, they collect money to buy consumer debt on the secondary market, such as the collection agencies do, then they cancel it out. And the idea of the rolling jubilee is an idea of avalanches of jubilee by which the debtors which are freed from their debt obligation can contribute to subsequent rounds of the jubilee. Lastly, for the movement's comparative description, there are the demands and the goals. maybe the most successful case in this picture is the one of Mexico, where 2 successive debt reliefs were obtained in 1996 and 1997. But the problem with the Mexican movement is that it extinguished itself right after the success, because people were not in the stress of being inside the movement anymore. The Bolivian struggle, on the other hand, peaked in 2001 with the armed occupation of the Bolivian Banking Supervision Agency. In that case, no public intervention was obtained and a harsh repression hit the movement. But on the other hand, the profitability of the microfinance sector was undermined for good. And for the Spanish and US case, they are contemporary case and the struggle is still ongoing. But for the Spanish case, the main battle for this legal change of being relief of debt after giving up the ownership of the house is still ongoing, but promising victories are coming in terms of European court sentences. And just to mention you, the spokesperson of the Plataforma de Afectado por la Hipoteca is nowadays the mayor of Barcelona. So it became a political subject, which is important in the Spanish country. Concluding, or going to the conclusion, I want to give a framework to explain the cases we've seen till now. So using this analysis, I hope that we can appreciate the link between debt and the reproduction restructuration in neoliberal terms. So the idea of financialization of the reproduction sphere, in which, as Federici says, workers have to take on the cost of their reproduction, is also evident from these cases. If we intend reproductive labor as the work that produces acceptable living conditions. In the case of debtor movements, the centrality of the nature of the collateral, which are the goods and the social bonds that are threatened when insolvency hits, is more than evidently related to the reproductive sphere. So being evicted from a house, being evicted from the means of production of the agricultural activities you have, the eviction of the microcredit collaterals, which are the social relationship you have, are related to the reproductive sphere. It is also the case, given the menace that debt's normativity pose to this possibility of living a decent life, that debtors' movement of refusal find their roots in this idea, in the very characteristic of the neoliberal reconstruction of household debts. Because of the intolerability for person, families, and community of such a menace to the vital sphere that allows them to live and reproduce. Thanks.